Hello, you've reached S.J. Thomason with Christian-Apologist.com. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for stopping by. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about Bart Ehrman and his debate with Mike Licona. I listened to a debate between Bart Ehrman and Mike Licona where Ehrman cited what he considered to be Bible contradictions, and in several cases Licona seemed to agree with him. Both questioned the dating of Quirinius' census, which is reported in Luke's Gospel. Licona did say that scholars have offered some solutions, yet he didn't elaborate in this debate. Both also seemed to agree that the birth narratives of Jesus were in conflict. Ehrman specifically questioned Luke's report that Mary and Joseph followed Jewish law and sacrificed doves in the temple 32 days after Jesus' birth if the family had fled to Egypt prior to that time. Ehrman further suggested that Joseph would not have known his genealogy through King David's line since King David lived 1,000 years prior. Let's listen to what Ehrman says, and please note that I'm going to respond to every single one of these things that he's pointing out because he's in many cases erroneous. So here we go.
We start with his birth. The birth of Jesus is narrated in two of our Gospels, Matthew and Luke. Nothing about his birth in the Gospel of Mark or in the Gospel of John. I'm going to focus first on the Gospel of Luke. Luke knows that Jesus was raised in the town of Nazareth, which is up in Galilee, the northern part of Israel, but he thinks that Jesus got born in Bethlehem, which of course is what most people think because they've read the Gospel of Luke. Jesus gets born in Bethlehem. The question is, if his parents were from Nazareth, how did he get born in Bethlehem? Well, Luke tells us how. This is found in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2, verse 1. You can read this for yourself. In those days, the decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be enrolled. Okay, well, nobody thinks that the entire world was being enrolled for a census. People off in China were not subservient to Caesar Augustus, so let's just say the Roman Empire. Everybody has to enroll for the census. What's that got to do with Jesus being born in Bethlehem? Well, his parents, Joseph and Mary, Joseph's not really his parent, but Joseph is from the lineage of King David, we're told. He's from the house and lineage of David. And David came from Bethlehem. And to register for the census, everybody has to go to their home of their ancestry. And since he's from David's family, David was from Bethlehem, he's got to go to Bethlehem. So they go to Bethlehem. And while they're there, Mary goes into labor and she gives birth in Bethlehem. We're told this happened when Quirinius was the governor of Syria. This is a hugely problematic passage, as Mike knows very well. What does it mean that Joseph went to the home of David? David was the king of Israel who lived 1,000 years before Joseph. Do you mean everybody in the Roman Empire is returning to their ancestral home from 1,000 years earlier to register for a census? Whoa, how's that supposed to work? Suppose that the Democrats win this next election and they impose more taxes on us, which is likely, and when they do that, we have to register for a tax by going to our ancestral home. You have to go to the ancestral home where your ancestor came from 1,000 years ago. Where are you going to go? And the entire country does this, and it's not mentioned in the newspapers. There is no reference to this census in any ancient source, period.
Incorrect. Apart
from Luke and Christian authors who've read Luke. Why no reference to it, even though the reign of Caesar Augustus is well documented? Because it didn't happen. There was no census of the entire world where everybody had to register at their ancestral home. It didn't happen. Well, why does Luke say it happened? For a very simple reason. He knew that Jesus came from Nazareth, but he had to have him born in Bethlehem because that's where David was born. The Savior has to come. The Savior is the son of David, has to come from Bethlehem. The census didn't happen. Moreover, Luke says it happened when Quirinius was the governor of Syria. Mike himself just told us, I'm not sure if you caught this part, Quirinius was the governor of Syria starting in the year 6 of the Common Era. King Herod died in the year 4 BCE. If Jesus was born under the reign of King Herod, he could not have been, the census could not have happened under Quirinius. There's a 10-year gap. Luke goes on to describe what happens after Jesus' birth. Mary goes into labor, she gives birth. We're told that Jesus was circumcised 8 days later, and then it came time for her purification, according to the law of Moses. This is a reference to a passage in Leviticus chapter 12. In Leviticus chapter 12, we're told that 32 days after a woman gives birth, she's supposed to perform a sacrifice for ritual purity. And so she performs the sacrifice, 2 turtle doves in the temple, and then we're told they went back to Nazareth. Okay, so they're just in town for a month. That's fine. But what do you do about what is said in the Gospel of Matthew about Jesus' birth? In Matthew, what happens is Jesus is born in Bethlehem. These wise men come to worship him. King Herod finds out that the king of the Jews has been born in Bethlehem, and he sends out the troops in order to kill the child. The troops kill every boy 2 years and under.
Note that.
Joseph learns in a dream that the slaughter is coming, and he's told to go to Egypt. He and Mary and Jesus go, they flee to Egypt. And they stay there until King Herod dies, and then they come back and relocate to Nazareth. If Matthew's right that they fled to Egypt, how can Luke be right that they went back to Nazareth a month later? The chronology doesn't work. That's the birth of Jesus.
Okay, so as is demonstrated by the Luke account and Matthew account of Jesus' birth, each has highlighted different parts of his young life. The accounts fit together like a glove. Matthew reported the earliest time in Jesus' infancy, while Luke reported when he was between infancy and 2 years old. This assertion is supported when one considers that Herod called for the deaths of all children under 2 years old. Why did he pick a year like under 2 years old? Further, Herod sent the Magi to Bethlehem to find Jesus, yet the Magi found their way to Jesus by following a star. Jesus could have been in Bethlehem or outside of Bethlehem when they found him. Note that it was said that he was in either Bethlehem or the vicinity of Bethlehem. The location of the house Jesus was in was not specified when the Magi visit him. How did the Magi know the Messiah would be born then? Consider the prevailing Jewish beliefs at that time as recorded in the Talmud, and I'll quote, "The world will exist 6,000 years, 2,000 years of desolation, meaning from Adam to Abraham, 2,000 years of Torah, meaning from Abraham to somewhere around the beginning of the Common Era, and 2,000 years of the Messianic era, roughly the last 2,000 years. But because our iniquities were many, all this has been lost." In other words, they're saying the Messiah did not come at the expected time. The Sanhedrin 97A to B reports this, and some of this is also reported by Michael Brown. In this debate, Bart Ehrman questioned whether Joseph would even know his lineage through David, which required him to go to Bethlehem to register. He questioned whether Jews would have such extensive genealogies. The answer's in the Bible, which records extensive genealogies. In 1 Chronicles, dozens of genealogies are recorded over 20 generations. In Ezra 2, 59 to 63, the importance of maintaining accurate family records of descent from Israel was highlighted in the rejection of those who hadn't kept their proper records. In the New Testament, Matthew recorded Jesus' genealogies back to Abraham, who lived between 2,200 and 2,300 years prior. Luke recorded Jesus' genealogy back even further, to Adam. Outside the Bible, Josephus traced Jewish history back to the beginning, when God formed the earth in Antiquities of the Jews. He traced history back to Adam, making mention of all key figures up until his time. So Ehrman's claim that it is unlikely that ancient Hebrews would record their genealogies is clearly flawed. Some have argued that Luke's census must have been taken in 6 AD because Quirinius was the governor at that time when a census was taken. Yet researchers have also determined that other censuses were taken. In the Roman Empire, in 8 BC and 2 BC, Nolet, in a publication, peer-reviewed journal, also notes this. Nolet makes a powerful argument, noting that Quirinius was likely the governor in 2 BC and that Herod didn't die in 4 BC, as some have posited. He stated that Herod's death wasn't likely the very weak partial lunar eclipse that occurred in 4 BC, but a much stronger eclipse of 1 BC. Hayner, in 1977, pointed out that it is unknown who was the governor of Syria between Varus and Gaius Caesar of 4 BC to 1 BC, opening the possibility of Quirinius. According to Tacitus in Annals 348, Quirinius had numerous roles. So the suggestion that he had enough status in 2 BC to collect census data is not a stretch. Josephus reported that Herod's death was after a lunar eclipse and before the Passover. There were no eclipses in 3 or 2 BC, but there were eclipses in 4 BC and 1 BC. The 4 BC lunar eclipse took place on March 13th. As Steinman in 2009 noted, the minimum number of days to complete all of the events Josephus mentioned that Herod completed between the lunar eclipse and the Passover is at least 41, which is a very consecutive number, given other scholars have suggested more. While there were only 29 days between March 13th and the Passover in 4 BC, there were 92 days between the lunar eclipse of January 10th of 1 BC and the Passover. Arguments against this dating of Herod's death also make mention of his successor, stating evidence that Archelaus reigned from 4 BC to 6 AD, so Herod's death must have preceded his reign. Herod had several sons, and the first one, to whom he had willed would be his successor, was Antipater. Antipater was convicted of murder in Rome, so Herod changed his will to Archelaus would be his successor. In Josephus's accounts of speeches from Herod and Antipater in his book, The Jewish War, 1:32 and 2-3, Herod had yielded up authority to his son Antipater before he died. Here's what it says. I confess too to thee, O Varus, the great folly I was guilty of, for I provoked these sons of mine to act against me, and cut off their just expectations for the sake of Antipater, and indeed what kindness did I do to them, that could equal what I have done to Antipater, to whom I have in a manner yielded up my royal while I am alive, and whom I have openly named for the successor to my dominions in my testament, and given him a yearly revenue of his own 50 talents, and supplied him with money to an extravagant degree out of my own revenue. And when he was lately about to sail to Rome, I gave him 3 talents, and recommended him, and him alone to all my children, to Caesar, as his father's deliverer. Now, what crimes were those other sons of mine guilty of, like these of Antipater? And what evidence was there brought against them, so strong as there to demonstrate this son to have plotted against me? Antipater's response to Herod is in the next passage, and it makes it clear that Antipater was a king already. He was the king, co-king. He says, and indeed, what was there that could possibly provoke me against thee? Could the hope of being king do it? I was a king already. In other words, and consistent with what Steinman has noted, Herod's son Antipater was a co-regent with Herod. It is therefore likely when Herod changed his will to Archelaus, he became a co-regent as well. Steinman stated, and I'll quote, the consensus about the reign of Herod is built around Schurer's interpretation of Josephus. It's fraught with difficulties. It fails to fit any of the verifiable chronological data external to Josephus and must resort to unlikely readings of Josephus's chronological data and a dismissal of other data as mistaken. A re-examination of the data demonstrates that Herod actually reigned from 39 BC to his death in 1 BC. The only readjustment required by this revised chronology is that Josephus made mistakes in Antiquities 14, 389 and 487 when reported the consular and Olympian dating of the beginning of Herod's reign. In the case of Antiquities 14, 384, even the defenders of the Schurer consensus concede that there is a mistake in at least the Olympian date given by Josephus. Apparently, Josephus calculated these dates 1 year too early and then assigned them to the wrong consular years. Since these two events were clearly 3 years apart, the mistake in the first passage, Antiquities 14, 389, led to the parallel mistake in the second, Antiquities 13, 487. Once the correct dates for Herod's reign are understood, all of the data external to Josephus, as well as all the other data given by Josephus, are in perfect harmony, and one can construct the chronology of his reign. That's end quote. Now let's go back to Quirinius. Quirinius was well esteemed with a long history of administration, as evidenced in this passage from Tacitus. Tacitus says, about the same time he requested the Senate to let the death of Sulpicius Quirinius in 21 AD be celebrated with a public funeral. And I added 21 AD. With the old patrician family of the Sulpici, This Quirinius, who was born in the town of Lanuvium, was quite unconnected. An indefatigable soldier, he had by his zealous services won the consulship under the divine Augustus, and subsequently the honors of a triumph for having stormed some fortresses of the Hamadadenses in Cilicia, which is prior to 6 BC. Just note that. He was also appointed advisor to Caius Caesar in the government of Armenia, and had likewise paid court to Tiberius, who was then at Rhodes. The emperor now made all this known to the Senate and extolled the good offices of Quirinius to himself, while he considered Marcus Lalius, whom he charged with encouraging Caius Caesar in his perverse and quarrelsome behavior. But people generally had no pleasure in the memory of Quirinius because of the perils he had brought, as I have related, on Lepida, and the meanness and dangerous power of his last years. This is in Book 3, Chapter 48 of Annals. He further held an honorary municipal office as Duumvir in Pisidian Antioch, and there's inscriptions that have been found to that effect. Quirinius' name has been discovered also on a coin and at the base of the statue in Pisidian Antioch. In the 25th year of Augustus's reign in 2 BC, the Roman Senate recognized him as a pater patriae, which means father of the fatherland. The Silver Jubilee marked the date in 2 BC, which was also Rome's 750th anniversary. Augustus sent out a decree the year before to all in the Roman Empire, including Jews, which required them to register their approval of this honor. This is noted by Lewin in 1865. According to Josephus, Augustus was 60 when he accepted the title and celebrated the dedication of the Augustan Forum. The Augustan Forum was a massive building of about 125 meters long and 90 meters wide, which housed a temple of Mars and numerous marble and bronze statues. One purpose for a census is to count a population for taxation. Some have argued that the Romans would not have taxed the Israelites or conducted a census in Israel before it became a province in 6 AD. But Josephus, in Antiquities of the Jews, 10:2-7, records Roman taxation of Jews from as early as 44 BC. The following passage is an example from Josephus. It says, and I quote, "For there was a certain sect of men that were Jews, who valued themselves highly upon the exact skill they had in the law of their fathers, and made men believe they were highly favored by God, by whom this set of women were inveigled. They are those that are called the sect of the Pharisees, who were in the capacity of greatly opposing kings. A cunning sect they were, and soon elevated to a pitch of open fighting and doing mischief. Accordingly, when all the people of the Jews gave assurance of their goodwill to Caesar and to the king's government, these very men did not swear by being above 6,000. And when the king imposed a fine upon them, Pharaoh's wife paid their fine for them, in order to requite such kindness of hers, since they were believed to have the foreknowledge of things to come by divine inspiration. They foretold how God had decreed that Herod's government should cease, and that his posterity should be deprived of it, but that the kingdom should come to her and Pharoras and to their children." This is in Antiquities of the Jews, 17:4. And here's another quote by Nolet. He says, "The pater patriae registration of all inhabitants of the Roman Empire initiated in 2 BC, and not the popularly believed census of Palestine taken in AD 6, is the census which Luke reported as having occurred when Quirinius was governor of Syria. He was governor in 2 BC and again in 6 AD. It should also be noted that Luke did not say that Quirinius was governor when Herod died, only that he was governor at the time the pater patriae registration was ordered, and Herod presumably was still alive. Furthermore, when Luke reported that the census was of the entire Roman world, and I put the word Roman in there, we now see that he did not exaggerate if we regard the pater patriae census of 2 BC and not Quirinius's local census of 6 AD as a census he was talking about. The streams of evidence resolve. Jesus was probably born sometime in 2 BC. And this is according to Nolet again. In summary, it is likely the census Luke described was the first census taken by Quirinius in 2 BC, the second census he took in 6 AD as recorded by Josephus, and in Acts 5:37. Furthermore, it is more likely that Herod the Great died in 1 BC, not 4 BC, as others have argued. Researchers have also estimated that Jesus was born between 3 and 1 BC, which would put him in his early 30s when he began his ministry. This dating is consistent with the age Luke gave him in his orderly account. In conclusion, we have no conflicts in the birth narratives. Sorry, Bart. You're wrong again. Nothing can stop the word of God from being shared with the world. Gamaliel made that clear in the book of Acts centuries ago when he told people to stop going after and persecuting Peter. He said, if these men are a product of God, nothing will stop them. Nothing is impossible with God. I would like to thank you all for coming by today. Please like, subscribe, share, and come again. I'm trying to build my channel. If any of you who are listening to this now would like to come on and chat with me sometime, just let me know. You can reach me at lead1225 on Twitter, or you can reach me at christian-apologist.com. Again, thank you so much, and please come again.